For my other job, the one where they give me a paycheck, I teach biology. And part of my job is to give students information. And then they use this information to draw conclusions and analyze, hopefully. So we had just started our genetics unit. We were talking about Mendel and his experiments with pea plants. And, nobody's interested in that, but I started talking about dominant and recessive alleles. But I'm going to replace the word allele with gene, which technically is not correct, but it makes it a little more understandable for all of us. So I'm explaining to students how if the parents have a recessive trait, it means they don't have the dominant gene for this trait. So their babies, their offspring, can only have the recessive trait. And if the parent has a dominant trait, well, they could have a dominant gene or a recessive gene, depending on whether they have two dominant or one dominant and one recessive. And then we're calculating percentages. And we apply it to humans now because students are more interested in humans than they are pea plants, because pea plants are boring. But at any rate, we say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, each can roll their tongue. Like that. And they have a child that cannot roll their tongue. So what genes do the parents have? And the students eventually figure it out. It's a math thing, but we use it in biology. And then I give them other situations where I give them the children and say, okay, they mate with these other children. And I use the word mate, or they mate with these other people. And what is the probability of them having children that roll their tongue, children that don't roll their tongue? And students are solving all kinds of genetics problems, and they're doing great. At the end of class, the next day, a student comes up to me, and I encourage students, go home and see what your parents can do. See if they can roll their tongues. A student comes up to me and says, I can roll my tongue. I said, well, that's great. So can I. She goes, but my parents can't. I paused for a second like I did now. The girl has a dominant trait, but the parents have recessive traits. Then she goes, how's that possible? TMI, too much information. I didn't know quite what to say to her. There are two definite possibilities. Well, three possibilities. But I told her, well, sometimes parents don't like to roll their tongue in front of their children because it makes them look goofy. You might want to double check, or it really doesn't matter that much. You can just not worry about it. Now, the other possibilities, which I didn't share with her because I think she already knew them, is that maybe they're not her parents and she wrong baby in the hospital. Maybe her dad's not her dad, which I don't want to get into that. And sometimes children are adopted, which differences will show up. But I chose the sometimes parents don't want to roll their tongue because they look goofy scenario, and it's really not that important. But it was a classic example where for one of the few times, I was too effective at teaching and gave my students too much information, and they did too much analysis. And who says the American education system is broken? It was working just fine right there. So that's my TMI story. And she never did come back and ask me again and put me in that uncomfortable situation.